romantic centered thing instead of just fun for everybody. Yeah. But I don't that's an emotional body thing, and I grew up with that being we weren't allowed to dance.
Oh, you weren't?
No, that was because that was like bad stuff happens when you start dancing.
Oh, you're having fun, huh? Oh, well.
All right, we're going to start with our first song here. We bring the sacrifice of praise. This is Ash Wednesday, so a special holy day for us. This is a season where we think about sacrifice, but it doesn't have to be. This is kind of an upbeat song, so it doesn't have to be a sacrifice that we're sad and upset about.
No, this is not a sad.
We bring the sacrifice of praise into the house of the Lord. We bring the sacrifice of praise into the house of the Lord, and we offer up to you the sacrifices of thanksgiving, and we offer up to you the sacrifices of joy. We bring the sacrifice of praise into the house of the Lord. We bring the sacrifice of praise into the house of the Lord, and we offer up to you the sacrifices of thanksgiving, and we offer up to you the sacrifices of joy. Let's pray. God, thank you for this special holy day that we are in the midst of, this Ash Wednesday. God, we are looking forward to this season of Lent. We ask that you would help us to experience it in a new and refreshing way. Remind us of those foundational important things that this season is all about. Prepare us, our hearts, our minds, our bodies for the celebration of Easter. Help us to be able to examine ourselves, to examine you, to examine your word as we need to today and into this season. We thank you and love you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you. So we left off on chapter 2 on the last time that we met. And we're going to do a little bit of recap here. And then kind of start into, we just really got into the first couple pages or ideas here. So this is, we're looking at step 2, chapter 2. And if we look at the 12 steps of recovery, we can see that it says, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And so if we're gonna look at the first few steps of the 12 steps, the very first one is a necessary starting point, which is we look at ourselves and we see that we are broken. We see that we are addicted. We see that we are helpless to transform ourselves and to live the lives that we know that is possible, that God created for. There's something missing. So that's where we start, is with that acknowledgement. The second acknowledgement is this one, is believing that there is a God, there is a power that is beyond us that can restore us, that can fix that problem. And then when we get into chapter 3, this is when we're going to look at, then we get into our response to that, which is we surrender to that power. So those are kind of the three steps. I mean, it's pretty basic. They're just the basics of Christianity, really, is recognizing our brokenness, recognizing God is there to help. And we use all these words for God. God is the Redeemer and the Savior and the Healer, and all of those things. If you look at the names for God, it's interesting because so many of them are related to the way God fixes things that need to be fixed, makes things better, So, but when we look at chapter 2, the thing that's necessary is we have to believe that there is an answer, that God is the answer. We have to believe it. Because if we don't really believe it, then we're basically on our own. And we can try on our own, but we're always going to end up coming back to step 1, is realizing I can't do it. So it's believing. And we looked last time at this word belief. This word belief is a holistic word. It's not just something that we do with our heads. So we're born and raised in a culture that emphasizes this. Not every culture is like that, but our culture tends to emphasize the mind and the intellectual aspect. So often we say the way we relate to God is through our intellectual understanding of God, through the rational experience. And this is where we lose ourselves, or a lot of people, is that sometimes as people try to experience God logically, they say, this is not making sense. God doesn't, there's many people that have given up on this idea of God because it's illogical. For there to be a God that is a force and a being in this world that is not only the creator, but is all loving and all powerful and all knowing. And then we say, well, if that's the case, why the mess? And so a lot of people give up at that point and they say, I know there's a mess. And if that is the God that created all this and this is what we're left with, I don't believe. That doesn't make sense. Because an all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing God would have done a better job. And
would have tighter control over everyone. Where we couldn't mess up.
Yeah. Whatever it is, it should be better.
Yeah.
That's usually so. Usually that's where we lose people. But that's an intellectual problem. So coming to believe. First of all, we'll look at, when we look at this chapter, we'll see the author says we have to think of belief as a more holistic experience. So believing in God means we are experiencing God intellectually, but we're also experiencing God emotionally, or in the heart. And then we're also experiencing God physically in our bodies. And so we experience God in all of those ways, and we can't just isolate it to one of those things. It's a holistic experience. And that's why as Christians, the incarnation is so important, because the incarnation says God is trying to relate to us in our minds and in our hearts and in the flesh. That's what God's trying to do. So we looked at this phrase about belief. Belief is an extended journey, a trust walk, a gradual letting go, an unlearning, handing over. No one does it on the first or even second try or 10,000th try. It's like, so belief is not, we may have experiences, or churches may emphasize experiences that are like the first step. So we say, on this date back in 1970, whatever, I came to a camp meeting or a church, and I gave my life to God, and I surrendered, and I asked Jesus to come into my heart, or whatever phrase that we're using. Usually Well, a lot of Christians, like if you grew up in Baptist circles, the question is, are you saved? And you say, yes, I am saved. I was saved on, and then you can tell the date and the time. I was saved here in this place when I said these words. All right, so those are powerful experiences that you should hold on to and cherish and celebrate. But belief doesn't. You didn't figure it all out then. That was just the first step. So it's like kids with first steps. Yeah, the first step's important, right? We celebrate the first step. I remember Ian's first step. It was really cool because I was at a friend's house. One of my only really good friends left from high school that I'm still in touch with, and we still have a good relationship. We were over there for, I don't know, it was Thanksgiving or something like that. And the two of us were sitting on the couch, and he walked from me to Chris, just like, he just did it. we weren't trying to make him do it. And I was like, Chris, those were his first steps. Wow, that's cool. Years later, not that this is an equivalent, but years later, he came down to visit, and we went to this doggy place in Jupiter, and he picked out this specific black lab from these people that are into the really fancy black labs. And so we were there, and I saw him pick the puppy and take it home with him. And when I talked to him a month later, maybe, he said, you know what we named our dog? We named our dog Hunter. Because so I mean it's cool. It's cool to have those experiences where it's like, this is a cherished, something began here, you know?
Yeah.
But belief, it just starts there. That's the thing that's so important.
Taking that first step is the tough one. Yeah.
Right. We were. I was talking with Marcy in the office earlier today about this revival that's taking place in Kentucky. That's in some social media, in the news. Something that's ongoing praise and worship for a few weeks. So I mean, those are powerful experiences. If you've ever gone into a revival celebration like that, it's powerful, and those can end up being in our minds. This is where this happened, but how do you integrate that into the rest of your life? That's the important thing. The same thing with the belief. As soon as you say, yes, Jesus, enter my heart, now what? It's like saying I do. That doesn't... That's a great thing to celebrate, but come on. That's step number one of a billion steps that are going. So it's the same with this. It's this belief is we're entering into a lifelong commitment of continuing to do this thing. And guess what? There's going to come times when we find it hard to believe.
Yep.
So I like, there's a definition of belief that says, I think this is Marcus Borg. He says when we look at the original languages, Hebrew and Greek, and we look at this word belief, it's actually closer to the word trust if we were going to put it into English. So the word to believe in something or somebody, or to trust in something or somebody, is pretty different if you think about it. Because I think in the culture we grew up in, believe, for me, it's still pretty much here. You know, I mean, you can say, oh, I believe in you in my heart or something like that. But it's different than trust, because trust is like this vulnerability, and trust is something that you're always working with. The big thing in our extended relationships is that there will come times when our trust gets a little shaky with one another, because somebody said or did something that either it may break that trust, or it may really test or question that trust. And so it's this ongoing thing. So when we say that we believe in a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity, we're going to experience doubts. We're going to question whether we trust or not. We're going to question whether we believe or not, because that's part of the journey. And I think that that's what God wants us to go through. If you think of the experiences that we have in relationships, if we go through a really challenging experience together, we can come out on the other side with a deeper and stronger trust in one another than we had before. But you can't have a stronger trust if everything is just fine and dandy. What do you need trust for?
Are you substituting the word trust to the word faith?
They are interchangeable. Belief, trust, faith. Mm-hmm.
I saw the 3 steps. Starting off, it's 3 steps. First, you believe in something, but you might not quite trust it.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go to trust, where you actually commit yourself to letting it happen. And then faith is when that trust has turned itself into something that you know. Faith that becomes your knowing.
Right.
That is it.
It's like you can't trust without time. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you meet somebody and you start having a conversation and you really hit it off, you can say like, I believe I love you because we are really hitting it off right now, and it's almost like we know each other. It's like I've known you forever, But how are you going to trust? You can start your trust then and there, but having trust for one day and having trust for 20 years, that's a very,
Trusting to make
very
your
different
first
thing.
step, though, is trusting is making
Yeah.
your first step.
Yeah.
In other words,
That's like an act of faith to
committing
take.
yourself right. But faith is when you had that trust and you know that it's
Yeah.
there.
Faith
When you
is.
have total faith in something.
Faith is, in my mind, faith is kind of forward thinking, where faith is like, I have hope and trust that I can move forward. So that's our belief. All right, now the 3 areas where we can experience God in our head, in our heart, and our body. And so if we look at, this is probably the 2nd paragraph of chapter 2. One of the things that we find is that our head is opinionated, and our heart is closed, and our body is defensive or defended. All right, so when we're looking for the God experience, we're looking for openness. So we need an open mind.
Sorry.
That's okay.
That's really ominous.
That's risky business.
Back to the bone.
All right, let's go to this is the what paragraph is this? This is, I'm going to make you dizzy at home. 1, 2, okay, just before the 3rd paragraph. This is the last sentence before the 3rd paragraph. As you surely heard before, religion is lived by people who are afraid of hell. Spirituality is lived by people who have been through hell. I love that. I love that.
That's right.
So if you think about it, this is almost like that difference between belief and trust. You can believe, you can have religious belief. I believe that when I eat this wafer or drink this wine, that I'm being obedient. I'm remembering, who Jesus is and what Jesus means to me. And God has promised that when I do this, I'm connected with God. My salvation is secure. So I can do that and believe in that religious experience, right? And we don't have to have any life experience one way or the other to believe that. That's just this intellectual belief and endeavor. But to engage in a trust in God, we have to go through life to have that trust tested. Like any relationship, there has to be moments where things are tested. So it's like when you're first with, a friend or a partner or a spouse or whatever, you can trust each other when you're doing things together. Do you trust each other when you're separated for a couple weeks and you don't know where the other person is and exactly what they're doing and what they're saying? And going through that and coming back together, that's an exercise in trust. And so spirituality would be, if I go through life and some really bad things happen to me, can I still trust that God loves me? Can I trust that God has my best in mind? Can I trust, and for a lot of us, that's where we can question, because if the worst happens, if we lose somebody close to us, if we lose, our health or our dreams, believing that God is a good God, trusting that God is a good God, trusting that, having trust that God allowed that to happen and being okay with that, that's a spirituality and a trust that doesn't just come, that's not just a religious experience. That's relational and that's experiential. So when we're thinking of head, heart, and body, we're thinking of experience. We're thinking of holistic. We're not just thinking of religion. Religion, you can learn the commandments. You can learn the rituals. You can follow them. You can believe that those things are going to make your life better. If I go to church every week, then I'm going to be more protected when I drive on the road with all the crazy drivers.
Okay.
If I pray every day,
Here,
then
Jesus, take the wheel.
my relationships, if I pray every day, my relationships are going to work out. The family that prays together stays together.
Yeah.
If I give my tithes and my offerings, then I definitely am going to be taken care of financially. I'm not going to have any financial problems. So that is almost more like being religious can be, it can be like us playing to the rules of a game. And it doesn't require trust, and it doesn't require relationship. And it doesn't require for us to integrate everything. I mean, it's just, so it's this line I think is important, because what we're trying to think is, do we believe in God in a way that allows us to integrate all the parts of our life, or do we have a religion that makes us kind of step outside of everyday life and do this thing that's totally separate from that, and that's our connection with God?
One of the things that remind me is this Thomas, the Apostle Thomas there. We call him Doubting Thomas, who was with the Christ during his part, committed himself to the life of that, trust. I would say he had to trust in God, in Jesus and all that, almost to the faith, but not quite there, because he had to see, after Christ was dead and no longer in his sight, not seeing the things, it says, and they told him he resurrected.
Right.
He said, no, until I could stick my fingers in it. I always thought Thomas was from Missouri, the show me state.
Yeah.
He said, unless I could stick my finger in there and the wound and all that,
Yeah.
he said, I'm not going to believe it. And when Christ appeared, he called him on that, do this and all that. That's when Thomas, I believe, got faith.
He believed. Yeah,
But he didn't
he
have
believed.
faith.
So that's interesting, and the question is, what is it that he didn't believe? And maybe he just didn't believe his friends. It's not that he didn't believe God. It's not that he didn't believe.
Couldn't believe something like that
It's
happened.
just like, I mean, all he's got to go on is like, oh, Peter said it. Well, like, do you trust what Peter says?
Oh, I see him except for him. That was
Yeah,
it.
or the you know, these the Marys. There was it depends on what story you look at, but it's like there's a couple Marys that were there, and you know, a couple ladies were the first to see the tomb, and it's like they saw the empty tomb. Mary saw Jesus. But some of them just saw the empty tomb and came back. Thomas wanted more, right? He wanted the full experience. So I can, I don't know. He gets a bad rap. He gets called a doubter, but
Well,
But
Jesus
hey,
didn't even represent.
I can
I
identify
think
with
he had
that.
every reason to doubt it. I mean, back in the day, stealing a body was not that uncommon. I mean, and especially somebody like Jesus going and steal his body, heck yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of benefit to the people that were trying to quash the movement.
Yeah.
There would have been a lot of benefit to get rid of the body.
Yeah.
Was a resurrection. I mean, he saw him raise Lazarus and see this. It's just like I say, I think when he died, when Christ died, that faith, or that, you know, that between faith and trust kind of dissipated a little bit. And
There's that I think is in the book of John. And so John's big thing is he wants people to believe, and it's a book he wants people to read the stories about Jesus and believe. And so at the end, the statement that Jesus says is, you know, I'm glad you believe, Thomas. And then he just adds, he's not downing Thomas, he adds, and those people that believe without experiencing this are going to be really blessed. You know, so, and he's not saying Thomas is cursed, or he doesn't say don't be like Thomas.
No.
He's just saying there's another experience, because not everybody's going to have the opportunity to be in Thomas, where Thomas.
he just kind of helped
Be
him
in his
progress.
shoes.
That's what he did by making the appearance. I really believe that. From that trust to faith.
Right. All right, let's opening three inner spaces. I think that's a subtitle. If we go forward in the book a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 4. Uh-oh. Okay, I need to get my book to update. I highlighted this on my phone. There we go. I highlighted it on my phone and it wasn't synced up yet. So these are the different spaces. So we have the mind space. That's the first one. And what he's saying is, to keep the mind space open, we need some form of contemplative or meditation practice. And then later on, a few sentences, he says, I personally describe contemplation as non-dual consciousness and find that it is necessary to overcome the thinking of most addicts, which tends to be all or nothing thinking. So let's think about this. So we're looking at the mind space, and we're having an experience of God intellectually in the mind. So that is possible. However, because God is beyond time and space, beyond the senses, beyond rationale, we're going to be limited in our experience of God. You know, we can intellectually, we can experience the beauty of creation. We can be in awe. I mean, we are so privileged that we live in a time where we can see our place in the universe like nobody else could before. You know, before it was this three-tiered universe, or like the flat earth kind of idea, which is there's the heavens, there's the earth, and then there's under the earth. That's like time of Noah kind of belief. And so when we come to realize, no, we're standing on a sphere, and that sphere, yeah, there's stuff below us, but it doesn't go very far. But then everything in every direction, not just up. Well, I guess it is up for everybody, but it's like you're up, and up in Japan and up in South Africa is actually going out in different directions. And then to find out we're in a solar system and we're part of a galaxy, and there's some pictures from Hubble telescope, and then now from the Webb telescope. And when you look far out into deep space and it looks like stars, and then they tell you, no, that's not a star, that's a galaxy. And it's like there are as many galaxies as it looks like that there are stars.
Yeah.
And when you hear how many hundreds of thousands or millions of light years away these things are, I mean, having that's a rational, intellectual wow, you know. And so we can have those experiences with God. We can be amazed intellectually at the sunset, at people. We can be amazed at people one way or the other. But sometimes what we recognize is that there's limitations to that. So what contemplation does, contemplative or meditation practices, what they do is they say we recognize the limitations of the brain. And one of the limitations of the brain is that in order for us to make meaning of things, we have found that we have to categorize them as dualities. So the only way that I understand a thing is to understand its opposite. The only way I understand cold is to understand hot. You know, the only way that I understand far is to understand near. So everything that we understand has a synonym and antonym, something similar, something different. And so we go through life with this comparison. Now, early on in life, we think, usually earlier on, we tend more to think in terms of black and white. So things are exactly this way, period. I remember as an English teacher looking back to things like grammar rules and realizing you're taught grammar rules at the elementary school level, and then later on you realize you're taught actually there are quite a few exceptions to this rule.
Yeah.
You know, and the same goes with math. You learn the basics, and then you're like, actually, there's a lot of exceptions to this rule. And then you learn it in science. You know, it's funny because both of our son David and his girlfriend are both scientifically minded people. So she's an ecologist, and he's like a neuroscientist, linguistic person. So they're science oriented. And so I remember we asked things like, because they're really they love going out in nature and identifying birds and plants and all types of things. And there are certain birds and plants that when you start talking about it and find out what it is similar to and what family it's a part of, you come to realize there's actually some living things out there that really don't fit where you would think that they would fit. Mm-hmm. And just one kind of silly example is like, where do you put the duck-billed platypus, right? So it's kind of like a mammal,
But not really.
but it lays eggs, but it has a bill.
Yeah.
But then it's also, isn't it like a marsupial
Yeah,
too?
yeah.
And so it's like,
Yeah.
we like to categorize and put things and make them black and white so that they're fully understood, and then we get these things thrown in the mix. They're like, I don't know what this is. where does this fit?
It's like palm trees are related to grass.
Right,
They're in the same family.
right.
Palm
Yep.
trees and grass.
Yep, exactly. So we're dealing with this particularly in the era that we live in right now, because we're living in a postmodern era. So the way that our grandparents or great-grandparents grew up, it was more of like a modern era where things were still black and white. So you can
Including the
have,
pictures.
pardon me?
Including the
pictures, yes. So you can have things like, I remember watching a documentary on World War II and World War I, and there really was not, in the public eye, there was not a lot of resistance to those, to volunteer participation in those wars, because we believed, black and white, we have enemies, and the enemies are, and you can, it's from a particular country, and they look a certain way, those are our enemies, and they are bad guys, period. And so people were willing to join the cause. We felt personally like we needed to defend ourselves, et cetera, et cetera. Then you get into the wars that come after that, Korean War, Vietnamese War, or Vietnam War, and then those after that, it's like we've entered into this postmodern era where we're like, are they bad guys? One of the things that with technology now, we can go and take care of business and take out the bad guys without having to put boots on the ground, so to speak. But one of the downsides to that, or one of the things that makes it complicated, is if you're using drones to go kill a bad guy, you're usually following him around with satellites and everything that can like look and see what he's having for dinner. But then you're also looking at the fact that he's got wife, kids, neighbors, family, and is a person, and is also somebody that is involved militarily, just like you have here. A soldier's not just a soldier. A soldier can be a son, a father, a mother, a daughter, or whatever, So we're moving from the black and whites, good guy, bad guy, no questions asked, to I don't know, maybe we need to think about this a little bit more. So in postmodernism, we're always asking and asking and asking, and we continue to ask, and we never, with postmodernism, it can drive you crazy because you can end up with no answers, because you realize every single answer is not really an answer. There's just another question. So we have to recognize in our mind, we need to think black and white, because if we don't, we're going to go insane. But we don't need to think too black and white, because then we're not going to pick up on nuances and complexities and things like that. Here's where contemplation comes in. This means, yes, we do pray, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. We do pray those prayers. We also pray, we may pray the Psalms. Lectio Divina is the practice of taking the Bible and reading Scripture as prayer. And it's a powerful experience. Open the Bible, pick your favorite verse, or pick a verse you haven't read, and just read it through as prayer. Read it through 2 or 3 times. Pause. Let it sink in. So that's another. Then there's contemplative prayer, is when you try to enter into an experience with God where intellectually you say, God, I know there are black and whites, and I know there are things that I don't understand, and I want to enter into this time and space, and I want to open my brain. I want to open my mind. And I want to, just for some moments, I want to not use this thing to draw conclusions and to analyze. And I want to turn this off as much as possible if I can. So that's what we do in contemplation, in contemplative practice, is it's learning how to turn that off. And I know the next thing is like, yeah, good luck with that.
How does that work exactly?
I have a story kind of messes with this idea of nothing's clear. I was brought up in a German community, and I was always ashamed that I was German. And I was born at the end of World War II, and then my son did a test a few years ago, a DNA test, and he's Ashkenazi Jew. And I Googled it, and yeah, that name of the German who came to settle in the United States was Jewish. And that blew my mind because my daughter had Jewish friends say she couldn't associate with her when she found out we were German. And I thought that's kind of talking to where you are. We know nothing is real clear cut.
Right. Right. Yeah, and doing genealogy. So I have German backgrounds, like 12% German, I think. So I think it's my great-great-grandfather came here in 1850 or something like that to New York from Hanover. And so as I'm digging and trying to find out more, you come to find out the borders of Germany, they moved around quite a bit over the years.
Oh, yeah, a lot.
So I actually came across one relative that was from Alsace-Lorraine.
Yeah.
Well, I got a grandfather from there too.
And so it's like, if they were born at this point in time, they would have been German. But if they were born a year later, they would have been French. And therefore, they were born a year later, they're back to being German. So, where we draw the line and draw the border between I can't talk to you because you are whatever, it's not always that clear. So in contemplation, we're first of all, we go into it aware of the power of our thinking and acknowledging, okay, I'm getting ready to do something and I'm going to want to turn my brain off, and it's going to be hard. And we're going to get into one of the ways that it can be done is to kind of pick something to focus on. So sometimes people will say, well, try to focus on your breathing. Breathe in, breathe out. And that's what we think about. And that's where the focus lies. And at least that helps that our thoughts are not on like 10 things. They're just on one thing. And then occasionally something will try to break through. But we know I'm thinking about breathing. But eventually, in contemplation, we actually want to go beyond that where we're not thinking about breathing. For me, something that is somewhat effective is to think about gray.
As in the color?
As in the color gray. And if I think about the color gray, it is a little even further away from thinking about breathing or thinking about a word or an object. Because gray, I can fill my mind with gray, and it's not black and it's not light, it's just gray.
Do you go into different shades of gray? Or?
I'd have to see it to tell you which kind of gray it is. Yeah.
He's stepping out of black and white now.
Yeah, that's right. It's not black and white, it's gray.
Gray is kind of like I call it it's the color of duality. It's a combination of black
Right.
and white.
Right. So it just happens that I didn't choose that on purpose. I just remember one day thinking about gray, and it seems to work. Now the other thing to do is, it's easy to fight it. It's easy to go into a contemplative prayer ready to fight. So it's like, I'm going to defeat my thoughts, and I'm going to, you know what I mean? And so we end up getting upset. Why can't I stop thinking? And so that can be a frustration.
Yeah.
So the way that I've heard a good thing to do is just simply acknowledge that thought. But if you think about how the brain works, and if you're quiet, you'll see things will come into your brain, and you didn't make it come into your brain. I mean, and you don't know where it came from. And it can feel somewhat related to the day, or it can be completely nothing. So we can acknowledge that and just let it go by. It's almost like, I've heard it described like being by the side of the road and just watching the cars go by.
Yeah.
That's like your thoughts. So you're like, I wasn't expecting a red car to come, but there it is. And you just say, well, there's a red car, and you let it drive by. But what we tend to do is, why is it the red car? What does the red car mean? Is it because of this or that? Where are they going? And then what we can do is we mentally chase after the car down the road. I got to figure you out. I need to know what you mean. So if we just let it go, there's going to be something else that'll come. And then we let it go and something else will come. And it is, I know as a Christian kind of being introduced to this initially was introduced to me, and I thought like, well, this doesn't seem Christian. This is not like the practice that I grew up thinking about. And how is this religious, or what does this have to do with God? But essentially what we're doing is we're saying, God, I trust you and I want to be close to you, and I'm giving this time, I'm opening this time to you for my mind, my body, my heart, and God, I'm not asking for anything, and I'm not telling you anything, and I'm not expecting or asking that you tell me anything or reveal anything. I just want to be with you. And if you think about that, our personal relationships can be like that too. There are people that we love dearly that we don't have to be talking, but just being with one another can be very meaningful and comforting, and it can help to increase our trust and our faith, and it can it can help remind us of the futility of the mind and the silliness of the mind and the limitations of the mind, even though the mind is a beautiful thing. So we enter into our relationship with God. And so in a way, this is kind of funny because we may intellectually try to understand God more, and there's probably some benefit to that. With contemplation, we're actually turning off that experience, and we're saying, with my mind, I'm going to do nothing. But I'm doing it with my mind. I'm gonna do nothing.
You're basically letting the red car just go on by.
This is like the Elijah experience is a great one that can be tied into contemplation. So he has this big experience on Mount Carmel. I always say it wrong because it's not like the caramel that you eat. Caramel. Mount Carmel. So he's up there and he has this big showdown and he wins, and God, fire down from heaven, burns it up. He kills all these priests from the other religion, and then he starts getting chased by the armies of the queen because he just annihilated all of her priests, and he hides in a cave, and then he's looking for God to answer. And it says God was not in the wind and the rain and the thunder and the... So oftentimes we want God to show up in our mind. We want God to show up in our thoughts. We want God to show us meaningful things. We want God to be meaningful, not meaningless, right? That's why we will sit with God and say, God, what does this relationship mean? God, what does this experience mean? We want to know the meaning. Even when one of the first things that we say when we lose somebody is we have to say it was meaningful. God had a reason. God had a purpose. God has a meaning. So it's like we have this desperate need that we have to understand things. And so in that Elijah experience, Elijah is like, I need you to show me that you exist like you did up on the mountain. You rained down fire from heaven and you showed me you exist. Can you show me again, please? I need reassurance that wasn't just like some crazy random thing that just happened once. Was that really you? And that's pretty common when we have these highs in our experiences with God. Later on, it's like,
do it again.
I want that again.
Yeah, do it again.
But it says God didn't do that. So it's not until Elijah's just in the quiet that the still small voice, or there's other translations that are like, anyway, they do other things where it's like, it was the sheer sound of silence, I think is one English translation. So that's the thing when the brain is turned off. God is beyond meaning. Because meaning is just an intellectual endeavor. Meaning is the silliest thing. Meaning is us, this gets me. Meaning is us telling ourselves a story. That's all it is. And a story can be as simple as beginning, middle, end. So anything that has a meaning, you're telling a story. Well, what is this thing here?
What is the meaning?
What is this? What does this mean? Well, let me tell you a story. And if you tell me a story, then I'll know what it means. So this gets a little bit more complicated. What does this mean? Well, this is going to take a while, but let me tell you a story. And the same is like with your relationship. You meet somebody. Who is this? Well, you can say a word, but you need a story. So everything is a story. Math is a story. Chemistry is a story. Biology is a story. It's all. That's what meaning is. God is beyond meaning. God is full of meaning, and then God is beyond meaning. And so going into contemplation is one way of us saying and reminding ourselves, I believe in God that is beyond meaning.
You can show things that God has done or how God has acted, but what he actually is.
Right. It's more than that.
Yeah.
That it's yes
God,
yes to that
God
and
is
more.
not just a pretty flower out in the field.
That's why a few months ago I felt like I was risking it when I did it, but I had the sermon, God is nothing.
Yeah.
And we talked about that. And basically what that means is God is beyond meaning, beyond story, beyond comprehension. And for God to be something means we're attaching meaning, we're attaching story, we understand.
You gave a
God's
different
beyond that.
definition for nothing. You said that nothing means
No thing.
no thing. Yeah.
No thing. But it's also nothing. Nothing feels wrong. Nothing feels like you're saying God is dead. But in a way, God was never alive. Because alive and dead has to do with the limitations of time and space.
And people.
So God can this sounds stupid. God can exist without being alive.
Oh, absolutely.
So when we think of alive, we've got this meaning that we're attaching to. So if God cannot die, then God cannot be alive. And this is when we are getting into these words and matching up with thoughts. It's not working.
No.
That's okay, because we're entering into a relationship with God that's beyond meaning. So we've talked about the mind. Now we have 0 minutes left to talk about the heart and the body. Essentially, the heart space is the emotional stuff that we carry around with us. So emotional baggage.
Yeah.
Anybody got an emotional baggage? Did you bring it with you this morning?
Tried not to.
Is it in your purse? Is it in your backpack? I've got mine in the trunk in the car. I just leave it out there in the car.
Oh, really? What you got in the trunk, Rob?
So this is the other place that we want to experience God, is in our emotions. And this is where we come to believe that God is the healer, and ultimately, this is the hardest. God helps us in our heart to accept the things that have hurt us and torn us apart. And that's where healing takes place. And we resist it so much. We resist the stuff that's already happened, the bad stuff that's already happened. We don't want to accept that we lost so much along the way. You know, I don't know if it's in Bible study, we talked about our grief timeline. If we look at our grief timeline and you tried as best you can to put in your timeline from the time you were born up until today, everything that you've lost. And if you could look at it, and if you could see and come to the place where you were in your relationship with God, you say, God, I accept every single one of these losses in my life. I accept it. I'm not fighting against it. I'm not angry about it. I'm not paralyzed about it. I'm not trying to make sense of it. I accept it for what it is. I am at peace with it. Completely and totally accepting the things that have happened. That's healing. But what happens is if we look back at our timeline and we bring up a story and then we get choked up and then we start crying and then we have a dream about it later that night, that's our heart telling us there's more healing to take place. It's not, we haven't fully accepted it yet. And it will some things will take our lifetime.
We were talking about dance, so I'm going to bring this up here. At our church, we sang this new song that's kind of common now. Dance, dance, wherever you may be. And they were so popular that when I go to the church in North Carolina on vacation, they said they didn't put it in the Methodist hymnal and they had to throw out the rough draft because that had to be in there and it wasn't. Our church was singing that. And then one night I had this dream that I went to church and we had a child care center for real, but in the dream it was in the basement. And I went down into the basement and the children were all dancing and doing this communal dance, just dance around like this. And I was dancing and then I realized I was dancing with God and it was beautiful and blissful, wonderful. And as I'm going around, I saw a gray woman in a black funeral shroud. And I woke up screaming. My husband said, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" And I said, "I just saw myself. I've got to die to be in heavenly peace."
Wow.
Wow.
I wanted to bring it up because it takes courage for me to tell that story because it's so weird. But that reminded me of the third lesson of what I have. My ego must die.
Right.
But it hasn't yet. That's why
You're probably not alone. Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing that.
it's so emotional though, and I don't
Yeah.
know my emotions, so.
Well, it's a good space to share, I think. The story that you share has a lot of heart to it.
Heart.
A lot of heart to it. Yeah, that's an emotional dream.
Oh, yeah, it was.
You know what I mean? And so you recognized something rationally. I need to die to self. This is my ego. But then in your heart, you felt it, right? And you I could see that in the heart, that being. Think of the experience of Jesus in the garden before he goes to the cross. That was a heart-filled experience of, I know what needs to be done. I know what I need to give up. I know what I need to face. But I really, 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 really don't want to because I'm really more comfortable where I'm at right now and I'm not ready and I'm afraid. And we can do this back and forth thing. That all takes place in the heart. So that's part of our faith, is acknowledging where our heart is in all of that. It's also not only accepting the things that have happened, but accepting the things that we know need to happen, like that. That's kind of a future experience. I haven't died to ego, so I know that's coming. I think of there's scriptures about where Jesus says we need to be willing to give up those closest to us. We need to hate our father and mother, or be willing to lose them. And I force myself to think about those things where I'm like, I really don't want to lose the people closest to me. I really don't. Can I accept it? That may happen one day. If I don't go first, I may have to face that. And if I'm going to really enter into a relationship with God where I'm willing to let these things go that are temporary, including my relationships with my loved ones. If you think about, here's where, and I know we're a little over, but if you think about it, we are so attached to ourselves and the people that we love. We're so attached and unwilling to let go of that. because it's so ingrained in our ego, in our idea of who we are.
Oh, yeah.
But you have
It's
no
not only
choice.
who I am, but who I love. So we're so attached to that. Yeah, I don't have a choice. It's like we're born this way. We're like, our brain is made this way. We're made for relationships and understanding ourselves. But Jesus is saying there's more. If you're willing to let those go, there's more. If you're willing to let those go, there's more. That's the message of the kingdom. If you're willing to let those go, there's more. So then we're faced with trusting that that's the case. That's what Jesus has to do before he goes to the cross. Things were going so well. I mean, yeah, he's got people that are after him and all that, but who doesn't have their haters, you know? It's like, but he's healing people, and the kingdom, the message is getting out to people, and it's growing, and this is changing Israel. Why do I have to lose this? Why do I have to lose this? Why do I have to, and not only to die, but why do I have to be tortured to death? Why? So this is where it's like, I've got my loved ones. This is the best part of my life. Why would I want to let that? Why do I have to let that go? Why would I want to let that go? And that's where my trust in God gets tested. And I say, do I trust that there is something more? That there's something even better? That this can go even deeper? But because I'm unwilling to let it go, I'm going to get stuck where I'm at, and I'm not going to experience what's more to experience. Who's to know that the nature of relationships and all that is not like way beyond where it could be, but I want to keep, it's like I want to keep my relationship at level 1 when there's level 100 available, but I don't want to let go. So that's a heart thing, because we know that by letting go, our heart's going to break, or has the potential for it, So trust is a heart thing. And it's trusting what has happened is going to be okay. We can accept it. It's trusting what is in front of us. And then just as a little teaser, we'll pick up right here when we come back again, because we're still getting a lot out of this, going this slower pace. The next part is the body. This is probably the part that gets the least incorporated into our Western Christianity. One of the things that we do when we start our time together is we sing a song and then we sing one at the end. That's kind of intentional, that we enter into the heart space and kind of let go of the mind space. And hopefully it relaxes us a little bit more before we enter into these Bible studies, right? But because of the way that we don't really incorporate the body, I don't have us standing up and walking around or dancing or something, because we're not used to including the body. But we need to include the body in our relationship with God as well. So we'll pick up with that, and then hopefully we'll get into the next chapter, which has to do with surrender. That's where we're acknowledging our belief in God is this holistic thing, and we can enter into it on so many different levels and ways. And then there's the question of, well, how do we surrender to it? So thank you, those of you who joined online today, Judy, Diane, Margaret, Pandora. Good to see you all, and glad that you're here. And I see Margaret says the slower pace is good for you. All right, we'll take your word. Thank you very much. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up our time.
Okay.
Just a reminder, we have a service tonight, Ash Wednesday. You're more than welcome to join in. This will be in person. We'll also do it online if you're only able to join that way. And we'll start this Lenten season. I think this is a great book for Lent.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's,
Now we got something to give up.
yeah. Yeah, now we have something to give up. Everything. Give up everything. Send us out in the power of your Spirit, Lord. May our lives bring Jesus to the world. May each thought and word bring glory to your name. Send us out in your Spirit, Lord, we pray. Send us out in the power of your Spirit, Lord. May our lives bring Jesus to the world. May each thought and word bring glory to your name. Send us out in your Spirit, Lord, we pray.
Thank you. That was
There we go.
You are welcome.